Hello and welcome to the State of the Fleet Industry, a video series produced by Automotive Fleet magazine and which is sponsored by Enterprise Fleet Management. I'm Mike Antich, editor of Automotive Fleet, and today I'd like to examine what's occurring in the fleet industry for the week of May 3rd, 2021. So what is the state of the fleet industry today? Are market conditions improving for fleets, and what is the data telling us? So to check this out, I enlisted Geotab, a telematics reseller that's partnered with Enterprise Fleet Management, and they shared with me industry-wide fleet mileage data that can be used as a barometer to gauge the vitality of today's fleet market. And as we end the month of April, the timing was perfect as we now have fleet data available to benchmark against April 2020, which was the first full month of the economic shutdown caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And this now provides a benchmark to show how the fleet industry has recovered 1 year after the start of the pandemic. So let's start by analyzing this aggregated and anonymized data by looking at the total number of miles driven in April 2021 and comparing that against the total number of fleet miles driven in April 2020. So what you see now displayed on your screen are three bars on the far left representing the total miles driven for 3 months in 2020. And each bar represents a specific month. The blue bar represents total miles driven in February 2020. Red represents total fleet mileage in March 2020. And the green bar represents April 2020. And then on the far right are three other bars of your screen, and they represent the same months, but now for calendar year 2021. And I'd like to call your attention to the two green bars, the one on the left for the total miles in April 2020 against the total miles driven on the right for April 2021. And as it's readily apparent, there's a strong uptick in fleet miles driven, which is a very strong indicator of renewed fleet activity and vitality. And next, I'd like to look at the aggregated and anonymized Geotab data by examining the number of fleet miles driven in April 2021 against the number of fleet miles driven in April 2020, but this time by breaking it out by 5 industry segments. So as you can see from this chart that's displayed on your screen, the 5 industry segments we track from left to right are fleets operated by manufacturing companies, those operated by retail companies, those in the construction industry, energy and utilities, and freight and logistics services. And the dark blue bar represents the total miles driven in April 2020, and the light bar represents the total number of miles driven in April 2021. And again, as it's readily apparent in these comparisons, you can instantly see it. Fleet activity and fleet vitality is increasing compared to same time last year. So this is definitely good news. And it appears that the increase in fleet activity is occurring across the board in most industries. However, and there always does seem to be a however, today there are strong headwinds that are creating challenges for fleet managers, namely constrained vehicle availability and longer order to delivery times for 2021 models, all of which are being driven by the ongoing automotive microchip shortage. And the big news from last week's State of the Fleet Industry video were comments made by Pat Gelsinger, who's the CEO of Intel, which is the world's largest semiconductor company by revenue. And in an interview he gave with the Washington Post newspaper, Gelsinger said it would take a couple of years for the global semiconductor shortage to abate. And frankly, I was stunned to read that. But I wanted to get other opinions. And since then, other semiconductor companies have weighed in. You know, one example is NXP Semiconductors, which said it's expecting supply to be tight the entire 2021 calendar year and warned that constraints for the auto industry could extend into 2022. Isn't this the same thing that the Intel CEO said in the Washington Post interview? And the CEOs of other semiconductor companies are likewise saying the same thing. Here's another example. In a CNBC interview, Ganesh Moorthy, the CEO of Microchip Technologies, said he sees the chip shortage extending into 2022 calendar year. Or consider this example. This is a Bloomberg TV interview where the CEO of STM Microelectronics said the shortage could extend into Q1 or Q2 of 2022. And he said microchip demand is so strong that lead times now are up to 9 months. And as another example, in an April 15 Reuters interview, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corp, which doesn't design its own chips, but it is a contract manufacturing company, they forecast that the chip shortage will carry over into 2022. And it's important to remember when you hear all of these statements from different CEOs, all of these companies are fabricating chips at full capacity. They're all operating at full steam. The problem, though, is that the current demand for microchips exceeds existing manufacturing capacity. And as we've seen in the chart shown earlier in the presentation, fleet activity is increasing also. So therefore, fleet demand should increase correspondingly. But the microchip shortage is inhibiting sales from reaching their full potential, both on the retail and the fleet side of the business. And what this essentially means is that there are going to be longer lead times to get products. It doesn't mean that you won't get your products. It's just that it means it's going to take longer to get the product. But this may present opportunities at the other end of the fleet life cycle. So what do I mean by this? Well, if you accept the notion that today's new vehicles are tomorrow's used vehicles, then today's shortage of new vehicles will represent tomorrow's shortage of used vehicles. And we've witnessed this already. We witnessed this through 2020 and into 2021. The shortage of used vehicle inventory creates a situation where demand is greater than supply. And when that happens, that puts upward pressure on used vehicle prices. So that's good news for fleets, especially since depreciation is our number one expense. And this will put downward pressure on depreciation expenses in future years. And the best advice that was given to fleet managers was sent to me last week in an email that I received from Charlie Shute, managing director of Shute and Associates. And he's someone who knows a thing or two about fleet operations based on his past experience being involved with mega fleets such as Pfizer and Brinks. And here's what Charlie wrote to me in regards to last week's State of the Fleet Industry video report, which also covered the microchip shortage. He goes, quote, "Excellent summary on the microchip quandary. The US has not bottomed out, so fleet managers beware. Prepare to run your units for a longer duration, and if you relax your PM schedules, be prepared to pay the piper on unscheduled repairs." And it's sound advice from Charlie. And let me likewise chime in to say, now you have to be even more vigilant, almost have a laser focus on your PM compliance. So I'd like to make one additional closing comment, is to remind everyone to check out our month-long virtual Global Fleet Conference, which starts this week, and it's going to continue until May 27th. And this Tuesday, May 4th, I'm going to be presenting a very comprehensive assessment of the US fleet market, and Mark Odinius of Dataforce will do likewise, covering the European fleet market. So on that note, I'd like to conclude my State of the Fleet Industry presentation for the week of May 3rd, 2021, and I'd like to thank you for listening.